If I'm not curious about you, what the conversation tends to become is a lot of the I statements.
If we viewed our 36-year-old as our kid and us still the parent, that's a train wreck waiting to happen.
We feel like because they're our kid, that gives us a blank check to go in and do and say anything that's on our mind, and that is a really unhealthy place to put your kids into. They will never act like an adult if you don't treat them like a friend and let them mature and develop and learn some of these things on their own.
He looked at me and said, "Mom, I hope that you are not thinking that you're going to move here and we're going to have these long leisurely Sunday lunches." My response back to him was, "I'm not going to move over here and crash your party. I'm going to start my own party."
To become the most interesting person, you have to become the most interested person. Welcome back to Beyond the Nest, another episode with my beautiful co-host. You show up every time.
Alice Swan Princess.
Alice
Here
Swan.
to please. That's what I do.
You do
show
it well.
up.
You do. You show up well. Listen, today I think we're going to be talking about building stronger relationships with our kids.
Yes.
And for us, we have multiple examples of when things went well and things that didn't go well. You know, for everyone that hasn't heard before, we have 3 sons, and I can think of specific examples of times with each one of the 3 where something was done or said that had it not been corrected, would have obliterated the relationship.
I was going to say, hey, do you remember that one time when I was laying on the couch and watched Downton Abbey episode after episode after episode? I got up to feed the dog, basically, and feed myself, but that's about all I could manage in a day.
Because
I did not deal well with the empty nest, the whole empty nest phase. And for us, it came in pieces, parts.
It did.
You know, but
and just from the personal experience, and we handled it so differently. You kind of went dark, what we call going dark.
Yeah.
When that happened, I was excited about it, but I was also almost oblivious to some of the challenges that you were going through. And, you know, still the relationship with the boys it was good, but they were reaching out for their own independence and didn't want a whole lot to do with my advice. Because remember, unsolicited advice is seen as criticism, and young men or even young women that are branching out, they're doing that on purpose, and they're doing what they were trained and designed to do. So, you know, through the experience that we've had over the last 37 years, while our oldest is getting ready to turn 36.
Yep.
And
you're old. You're so old. How do you have a 36-year-old son?
I don't look like it, do I?
No, you don't.
Okay.
No,
so
not at all.
When we look though at what has transpired over the last decade, when they have moved out, what have we done intentionally to build, or in some cases rebuild, a relationship that for whatever reason had been tweaked to the point of it was tenuous at best?
Well, the terrain that we navigated with each child was different because each one of your children, I don't care if you have 3 or 30, they're all going to be different. So yes, the terrain was different.
30 kids?
Maybe. I mean, I just said that as,
that caught my
it doesn't
attention.
matter.
It's like sometimes you just begin to zone out, and then you'll say something that just,
I mean,
30
the
kids.
Duggars had 22? 23?
That's a lot.
That's a lot of kids. But what my point was...
Oh, there is a point. Okay.
The terrain is different with each kid.
Oh, it
and
totally
we had
is.
to learn, like if you're a note taker, we have 5 things that we came out on the other side knowing.
And to that point, every personality may be different, but I believe these 5 points
Absolutely.
will be applicable to every personality type.
Yes.
And regardless of gender. So I think these are the 5 things that we kind of settled on that really helped us get through some of those rougher phases. And, you know, it's like I've always told the boys, you can learn one of 2 ways: your own trial and error or the trial and errors of someone else. So to the extent that we can apply that here, I'd much rather everybody learn from our trial and errors instead of their own.
Teenagers, or if you've got tweenagers and you're looking to strengthen relationships, yes, this is for you too.
Yeah.
So.
And this first one, it's a big shift, but it starts years before the big shift takes place. And we've talked about it briefly in the past, but the number one shift from being the parent to being the friend.
And I think age really matters here because you're not going to shift to being a friend to your 13-year-old.
No.
You've got to shift. We're talking older kids. But yeah, if we viewed our 36-year-old as our kid and us still the parent, that's a train wreck waiting to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
That's not going to work.
No. So that's why I'm saying when we talk about a shift from parent to friend, it is years in the making for this particular one.
Yes.
And if we don't take it seriously, you're right. There will be emotional ties with our adult children that we're not really treating them like a friend. I often think about if I were to see something in one of my friends that I felt like they could do better, I'm not going to go just butt my way into that conversation and say, hey, you need to do this better.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we take our adult relationships or with our kids differently.
Yeah.
We feel like because they're our kid, that gives us a blank check to go in and do and say anything that's on our mind. And that is a really unhealthy place to put your kids into.
So an example of treating your adult child like a friend is something along the lines, like even for us, of like our oldest son, Taylor, he went through everything first, which your oldest child typically does. But getting to the place where we don't advise him. Like I remember even when he was younger, you didn't really advise him on things unless he asked you. Even in areas that we probably knew, oh, you're this, no, you might need to watch out here. Like you asked a lot of questions, unless he was headed toward a tragic demise.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that it takes a lot of refraining as a parent to refrain from giving unsolicited advice or directive conversation. You have to refrain from doing that and listen instead. Like you had how many coffee conversations with him? You guys would meet at Starbucks and you would talk about things. And there's no telling how many countless hours that you spent with him where you could have been directive with him. But as a grown man, and at that point as a married man, you listened. He asked questions. And then I'm thinking in terms of if you've got a 12 or a 13-year-old, like a teenager, I think this shift can't happen all at once. Mm-hmm. It's little tiny things that you do. Like if you start asking more questions and hearing feedback, how's my child going to answer this? Or maybe ask them questions in terms of, how do you feel about like you're coming up on a really big test. How do you feel about that? Like ask questions to get into their world, move things from the conversation of, being the directive parent to, I want to get into your world and hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah. And it's easier to say than to do sometimes, but it really depends on the type of relationship that you have. But what examples do you have maybe specifically about what does it look like to be a friend with your adult child?
A specific example?
Can you think of an example?
You're putting me on the spot.
Mm-hmm. This proves it's not scripted.
No, it's not scripted. Oh, I don't know. You're going to have to give me a minute to think. Do you have anything off the top of your head?
Yeah. I mean, if I think about what would it be like if I saw one of my friends out in public? I probably wouldn't go over and slap him on the butt like I would maybe my kids. I'm going to treat my friends differently. I'm not going to give unsolicited advice.
Right.
I'm going to be the eternal encourager.
You respect their decisions without challenging. Yeah.
So I'm not going to go up and try to constantly fix a friend.
Right.
So it's going to be one of those things that I'm going to treat them with, like you said, I think the right word there is respect. Mm-hmm. And you've said before, one of the biggest challenges for adult children and their parents is, do the parents treat them like a child still, or do they begin to treat them like a fellow adult? Mm-hmm. And some parents would say, well, they're not acting like an adult. That's not even the point, right? they will never act like an adult if you don't treat them like a friend and let them mature and develop and learn some of these things on their own sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else on the shift from that parent?
No, I think I remember, this is a little different because I don't know that we have a ton of like really difficult train wreck situations that we walked through. Because I feel like we really had to learn how to, first of all, our boys push back. They don't retreat typically. They'll push back if we overstep boundaries. That's just how they are. And whether that's good or bad, it seems to have worked for us because it's helped us know where those boundaries are without us having to figure that out on our own. But like, when we moved over here, we told the kids we were going to move. I remember having a conversation at a coffee shop with all the kids. And, Taylor looked at me, our oldest, and specifically, I guess, addressed this to me because of the issues in the past where I had unrealistic expectations that we were going to be like the Walton family and my kids were just going to come over and they were going to we're going to have a big lunch together and then they were going to hang out and, it's time to go home and then they leave. Well,
I bet you lost a lot of people with the Walton family. I think the Waltons.
The Walton, I aged myself, but, anyway. But he looked at me and said, Mom, I hope that you are not thinking that you're going to move here and we're going to have these long leisurely Sunday lunches and hang out with you guys all the time. He was like, we've built a life here and we have friends and we have stuff. And that was okay. I did not get offended. I actually know him and he's a very delightful child, but I was a little amused on the inside. And my response back to him was, I'm not going to move over here and crash your party. I'm going to start my own party.
You did.
And we did. But here's the thing. Underneath it all, I could still give him that autonomy. That could have been a problem with a lot of people. And, it didn't even hurt my feelings. But I know what he didn't know. When you start having children, you're going to want your parents here. You're going to want grandparents around, so I think sometimes as a parent, we know things that our adult children don't yet know because they haven't experienced it.
Life experience.
And figuring out how do I let him or give him the respect of, that's fine. You get to dictate your life. I'm not here. I'm not going to change it. Yep. That's just one small experience, but.
And that ties perfectly into number 2, actually, because when we talk about how we interact with our friends, the tone that we use, the language we use. Yeah. So number 2, what do you have?
You're going to communicate and you're going to be open and ask questions.
Yep. So specifically, because I'm more the rule follower apparently than you are.
What?
Communicate with openness and curiosity. That's actually what we had talked about. So she went off script right there. But anyway.
Okay. That's not how I think it is. Openness and curiosity. I'm no.
I love this though, because when you deal with somebody from a position of being curious, it changes your communication style.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not curious about you, what the conversation tends to become is a lot of the I statements.
You turn into a me monster.
The me monster, it's all about me, myself, and I, and their issues become mine. No, but when we think about communicating with our adult children from a position of openness and curiosity, it literally changes the choice of our words. Not only the energy that comes back. We had a session on energy recently too. It changes the level of energy that we have. And, there's always been, I heard this story about 3 or 4 years ago. It's a business one, but it definitely applies. But Jay Abraham, which is a massive name in the coaching and consulting space, he tells a story that he flew from St. Paul, Minneapolis to Sydney, Australia. Long freaking flight. But he got there, and because of the time change, he really wasn't tired, and also got the wife and kids settled. He went up to the top floor of this hotel, and it was one of these massive hotels, but the entire top floor rotated. And it was like an observation deck, but it had a full bar. But he gets up there, and it was like 1 a.m. their time. And there was only one other person in the entire floor besides the bartender. He grabs a drink, makes his way over to this gentleman, introduces himself. Hi, my name's Jay Abraham. I'm from St. Paul. I'm here for a conference, to speak at a conference. What do you do? And the gentleman told him what he did. And Jay was like, that is amazing. How did you get started in that? Where all has that taken you around the world? And he had traveled literally all over the world with his topic. And Jay said, I was genuinely interested in what he was saying. He said, for 90 minutes, I just learned about him, his family, what he did. And I told him, good night. I'm going to go head in. He got almost to the elevator, and the gentleman yelled across the room, said, hey, Jay, you are absolutely the most interesting person I have ever met. Jay goes, well, appreciate that. He gets on the elevator, and he's thinking he knows 3 things. He knows my name, where I'm from, and I'm here to speak. So what made him the most interesting person this guy had ever met?
He asked questions. The guy got to talk about himself.
Yeah. So Jay's phrase, way he worded is, he said, to become the most interesting person, you have to become the most interested person. Mm-hmm. Think about that in the relationship with our sons or our kids in general or our in-laws. If I come at them with the position of, I am curious about you, I'm coming at it from a position of openness, curiosity. Yeah. My language changes. They feel a genuine connection because I'm just genuinely concerned. Yeah. I'm interested. So not that my goal in life is to become the most interesting person to my sons or my daughter-in-laws, but if I approach it that way, there is just an inevitable connection that's going to be made.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to fix them. I'm being interested. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and I think we've all been around people who, when they ask us, like maybe a close friend, and they ask about a certain situation, maybe we're struggling with something, and then we try to talk to them about how we really are doing, and we can't get through everything because they bring up themselves and, I remember a time when whatever.
That's good.
I think with our children, here's another example with my grown children. Any one of them at any given time maybe hits a crisis, or, we all ebb and flow through life. Even if our relationships are healthy, something is going to happen that maybe our kids need our support in. And if I am always bringing up in a conversation with a kid who's not in crisis, oh, have you talked to your brother about whatever? Well, that's going to make them feel like I'm more interested in information they can give me about the situation here to satisfy me than I really am in their life. And I think that your kids, even though they're adults, they need to know that, no, I really want to know what's going on in your life. Like, I love hearing about even what you think is mundane, just tell me, give it to me. And I think for parents, it's also a connection point, because that's what this whole thing is about, right?
Yeah.
How many parents do we come into contact with that crave connection with their kids? They just don't have it.
Here's a caution I would give when we talk about being open and curious. When they do answer your questions, let's not fix them. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be so easy to be curious about, how are you doing? Oh, you're struggling here? Have you tried this? I can immediately, if I'm not careful, get into fix-it mode the way I was when they were 10-year-olds. We've got to be careful with that, right? We can ask questions, we can be curious and open, but instead of being directive, because if I hear them hurting and I have a solution, I'm going to be hard-pressed to not try to lean into that. But it's like, well, what have you done to try to fix it? Have you considered doing this? Because when you put it in a position of asking questions back, you're also continuing to help them to develop solutions. Because a lot of times when we're in the middle of an issue, it's like that nose on the tree. You can't see the forest because you're so close into it. A lot of times, if we will ask our adult children, how are you doing? I'm genuinely interested. Oh, you're struggling with this. Instead of saying what you should do, because when you end up saying you should,
it's directive. It's
very directive, and walls begin to come up, even if you're right? So it's about, well, have you considered this, or what have you done to address it? It allows them metaphorically to start backing up from the tree a little bit to maybe think clearly, to start finding some of their own solutions.
Well, maybe for a parent who has been in a season of or their whole life has been very directive and they realize they need to pull back, maybe you can shift a little into asking. If you feel like, oh my gosh, it's getting ready to come out of my mouth, I can't help but be directive. Ask. Like we've talked about this before. Ask your kid, are you open to hearing maybe a suggestion? And then be ready for the answer, because there are going to be some kids that are going to just obligingly say yes. So be able to read the room, read your kid. Sometimes your kid might say no, and then you have to be okay with that and not be offended.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I agree with you. I just testing you.
I'm totally sure. Because I think it's a big giant shift to go from, oh, I've been directive all these years. My kid's starting to pull away from me. And now how do I go from that to just asking open-ended questions when my head is spinning with all of these things that could possibly be solutions?
Right.
That would be really hard,
Right. And again, I think, when we talk about relationships, the stronger the relationship we have, the more opportunity we're going to have to share some of those solutions.
Yeah.
But if we are constantly quoting, fixing them, or being, the shoulds.
Well, and I'm also thinking of a situation with our youngest, as far as communication goes, creating that place where they can come to you with something that, you unknowingly answered a question about his bachelor party, and it just didn't sit right with him, and he called you on it.
He did.
And you would have never known if you didn't have the relationship with him that he could have picked up the phone and said, hey, I need to let you know, I'm not mad at you. I'm not seeking out therapy because of this. I am letting you know this is how I felt when you responded to me about attending the bachelor party. And I love that he was able to do that. Yeah. But I think you have to intentionally create relationship where, they can call us out on things, and, we don't necessarily call them out on things, but we have to guide, Yeah,
it's almost like you get permission to move forward.
Yeah.
Right? We do that in business all the time. Asking questions allows me to temp check, where are we in this business relationship? And depending on how you answer will allow me to know, are we going to move forward?
So what I just said, do you feel like there's a double standard in parenting adult children?
What do you mean double standard?
I'm thinking back to what I just said. We want to create the atmosphere where our kids can call us out on things, but it's a real slippery slope when parents call their kids out on things, especially if the relationship is not as strong as it should be, or you're rebuilding relationship. It could feel like a double standard to some parents.
And I think there is a double standard for some parents. Some parents would be the ones, I will call you out, but you don't call me out. I'm the parent.
Yeah.
You don't call me out. I'm dad. Mm-hmm. This is mom. We're almost like we're above reproach. You cannot challenge us. So I think it definitely boils down to the strength of relationship. Is there double standards? The world is made up of double standards. Doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
But yes, there are double standards.
Yeah. Because I know somebody who's got a friend who, in their friend group, these are grown parents with grown kids. There's one mom that tends to be I don't know, kind of like not a mean girl, but the one that everybody kind of listens to, and nobody is willing to call her out. So it's not just adult. I think there's when you read people, even in friendship circles, there's people that that you could call out, and there's people that for whatever reason don't get called out very often. So, yeah.
So tying that into number 3.
Yeah, tie it in, brother.
Tie it in. If there are double standards, and it's more of a challenge, I think, within families.
Yeah.
Because it's harder to maybe call those out. And I think our perspective on parenting may be different than someone else's, which doesn't make us right or wrong. It's just, this is what works for us. We number 3, this is what we attempt to do. Respect. Go ahead.
Respect boundaries.
Respect their boundaries and their choices.
Respect their choices. Yeah.
Which is a really hard thing when you look at them and you think, this is self-destructive behavior. It doesn't mean I'm not going to say something. If it is honestly self-destructive, I think I would be in an error if I didn't bring that out. If it's simply a preference on a choice, that's where I have to draw that line and respect the boundary. Right? Yeah. So because of that, you and I have to have a good enough relationship that you and I can vent to one another, get it off our chest maybe, but we have to respect the boundaries that they set. Mm-hmm. Now, what's really where I see this come into play a lot is when now your adult children has children. Mm. We are not parenting their kids.
We're not?
No. And there are some situations, though, where people our age do have full custody of their grandkids. So it's a little different. It's not what I'm talking about. But how many times have we been with our grandchildren and you have to remind me, you're not parenting them? That's
why I said, we're not.
I knew why you said that. I was just letting everyone else know why you said that.
Well, I think this is what gets people into trouble, because there are going to be situations where we don't always like a choice that our grown child has made. And I'm not even talking a sin issue. Like, we're talking just that was a knucklehead decision kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of worth in letting them do that, letting them make it, not rushing in, because we talked in another episode about a helicopter mom, like being helicopter parents. Like, our kids are old enough that they'd shoot a helicopter down in a heartbeat if I was helicoptering them. They have no problem pushing back. But there are younger kids that it's really difficult for parents to respect boundaries and respect choices. And I think it's not just an ask, it's an absolute requirement. You have to respect boundaries. Like, I don't want somebody mowing over my boundaries. Like, I'll run really fast from a boundary buster person, because that doesn't feel good. That feels like you don't even see me. Like, we're not going to be besties. Sorry. So why would I expect to create a long, healthy, lasting friendship with my adult children and their spouses if I keep busting through their boundaries?
I can think of 2 examples, both with the oldest one, with Taylor, when he and Lindsay had gotten married. Yeah. And we were living in outside of Memphis, and I remember him making the statement, we're not coming over here for lunch every Sunday anymore.
Yeah.
That was a boundary that he and Lindsay had discussed, as far as these are our boundaries. These are the parameters. And now, he was way too direct in how he said it. It's like, if you can't handle that, we just won't come over. That's a little strong. He's much, much softer now in the way he communicates. But that was one of the boundaries that we honestly had to respect. We didn't have to like it. I know you absolutely loved having Sunday lunches, and I mean, the way you're
but I did go too far with it, and I see that now.
And he let you know. So that was one of the examples of, that was a boundary he was willing to put up.
Yeah.
And as a parent, the best thing we can do in situations like that, like you said, it wasn't a sin issue. It was, these are our boundaries, and we respected that. The other one is respect one of his choices. I remember there was this one Sunday we were having our weekly meeting at Starbucks on a Saturday morning, and he told me that he was getting ready to start a newsletter and that people were going to pay a subscription to him to write a newsletter. And I'm sitting here looking at this young man, he's 23 maybe. I'm thinking, what kind of newsletter are you going to write that anyone's going to pay you to read? Now, I'm not saying any of that. Verbally, what I'm saying is, dude, you can do anything you set your mind to do. What do you need from me? that type of thing. And then I remember coming home telling you asked, how was your coffee with Taylor? And I'm like, we got to be praying for him and Lindsay. Why? And I'm
and
like,
automatically my heart's gripped thinking, oh my gosh, what's happening? Are they having trouble? Like, oh.
Yeah, but my answer was, they may end up moving back in with us. Why? And I'm like, because he's doing something crazy.
The faith of a father for his child. Yay.
I just had no idea that industry existed, and the rest is history on that. But it was like, not only did we respect that particular choice, which I think was, at the moment, I thought that is a poor choice.
Yeah.
We respected it. We encouraged it. We built into it. Now, not always do they turn out, but honestly, in that moment, I thought it was an unhealthy choice to be starting something new. And like, you're 23 years old, I didn't get it. Mm-hmm. Right? It's turned out to be okay.
Yeah.
More than okay. But just a couple of examples of respecting their boundaries. And all three of the boys, we could tell stories on all three of them, is like, these are our boundaries, or, this is what I can accept, this what I can't accept. And as parents of adult children, if we are boundary busters, which you called them, what is that going to do to the relationship? How frequently are they really honestly going to want to be around if we're constantly busting their boundaries?
Yeah. Not a lot. Like, I'm thinking with me, I wouldn't want to be like as a friend. I don't want to hang around somebody who's like, does not study me, or like, like, I know the people that I hang out with, like, I know what they're going to need. I can't give them what I would need in that situation. I have to give them what they need. And even with our kids, we know our kids well enough that we give them what they need, personality wise, So, yeah, boundary busters. No bueno.
What was number one?
Oh, number one is shift from parent to friend.
Number two?
Communicate with openness and curiosity.
You got it right this time. Number three?
Respect their boundaries and choices. Yeah.
Number four,
we have to find new ways to connect as equals, as friends.
Yeah. That's good.
I feel like you go, and this is going to be kind of hard because I always have to use my hands to talk. But when you have a child, you are here as a parent, and your child is here. Like, you're communicating kind of down, because a child needs everything. The older that child grows, it's almost like a leveling up. And when they're adults, it's face to face, friend to friend, mano a mano. And that is a shift that has to take place over years, If not, you'd have a grown person who behaves like a child, and nobody wants that, And
you have some very strong-willed parents that it doesn't matter how old they are or how old their kids are, they still expect that child to submit to the wishes or authority of the parent, even though the child may be in their 40s.
Yeah.
Where did you guys find that line of when do they, maybe you have to make it up as a parent, but where is that line between they have to obey and they get to make their own choices and we're going to get out of the way? Like, is it a progression? Is it kind of like one day we decided this is what's going to happen? Where is that? Is there a line? Like, how do you guys define that?
Okay. We're jumping back to number three, but that's totally okay. As the producer, you can do whatever you want.
I know. I get what you're asking.
I do.
Yeah.
But that's different than number four. But yeah, there becomes this shift, especially with dealing with young men. And I didn't have daughters. By the time we got a daughter, she was full grown. Someone else raised her.
Right.
As a daughter-in-law. But the older they get, my whole focus, I think I told on one of the other episodes, my whole focus was to prepare my boys to launch, not just launch, but to launch well. So I knew, or I felt like I knew, that there were certain attributes they had to be equipped with to be able to launch well, to make good decisions, looking out instead of how does this decision affect the next minute or hour? How does this decision affect next week, next month, next year? And so there was a high level of intentionality, and this is not bragging on me, it's the coaches that I had were the ones that challenged me to be able to think out more than just the next week. So because I hired those coaches, they were challenging me on that from a work side. I wanted to make sure that my boys had the ability to critically think, strategically think, intentionally think, how does this decision affect the future? Now, did they do that at 18? No. They had a lot of decisions that they weren't even thinking of the next minute, but it felt good in the moment. But that's where it's like, how did that turn out for you? And allow them to begin to self-critique. That didn't plan out too well. That didn't work out at all, or that totally backfired. Like I think we mentioned before, all three of the boys had, they started out working hourly wage jobs. All three of them got fired from said hourly wage jobs at one point or another. And I think Taylor got fired for more than the other two combined. But it's because they didn't always think about the consequences of actions. But as we prepare them for the next phase of life, that's where that came in, is a progression of they can handle this at 12, this at 15, and there's no book for it. That's one thing that, even when we started talking about creating an intentional legacy, there was no book for that, no playbook that I could find, which is where this one came from. But it's being intentional and knowing that the older they get, the problems, the challenges, the opportunities they get to deal with are greater.
And I think even when they're growing up, offering choices just to see, what are you going to choose?
Yeah.
Are you going to choose something that makes me lean in toward, oh, you are really maturing? Or are you going to choose things that I'm like, oh, what did you just choose?
Yeah.
Practically speaking as well, when a child lives under your roof, they're not on their own yet. They're not able to, support themselves. Like, there's going to be a level of, there are house rules that you have to respect, obey, whatever you want to call it. And I believe that as a child grows and gains more independence, then you're also allowed more, because you choose what is going to signify to your parents that I can handle this responsibility or I can't. And that's our job as a parent. It's not like for us, it wasn't a power trip. Well, for you, it might've been, but for me, it wasn't a power trip.
Wow.
It's one of those things of like, here's a case in point. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about their son getting a driver's license. And I remember having we had this conversation with our kids, just because the state of, at that time, Missouri, says that you're old enough to drive. If we know that you are not ready to handle that responsibility, I don't care if you're 16. I don't care what the state says. We will cross that bridge, and we'll you can learn how to drive on a different timetable. And that has to be okay, because we knew them, We, at different times, we had the boys move back in after being out. Yeah.
And then they moved back in. So they're technically adult young men, but they're now back at our house. So to your point, there were house rules. There were certain things. Now we had to massage them a little bit, the rules a little bit, because my tendency wasn't a power trip. It was about making sure that the house rules stand. And there were some challenges with that, come in at a certain time, because it's disrespectful to come in at all hours of the morning or whatever. So there were certain rules that they had to follow because they lived under our roof, which is, now we need to make sure your mom understands these rules. Since she's living here under my roof, she needs to quit partying so much.
Right. Yeah. She's 84, and those 84-year-olds, boy, they're wild.
She likes to line dance.
Well, I think too, as a parent, if you've got an older child living under your roof, you realize, and maybe this is not all moms, but like, I couldn't go to sleep until I knew everyone who was supposed to be in the house at night was in the house. Yeah. So I think every family is different. Every family's tolerance level for things is different. Yep. And just because it worked for us doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So I think that's what you're talking about, massaging the rules depending on the personality and the responsibility level of your child.
The dynamics.
But
how many.
Finding things to connect with. Like,
back to number 4. What, are you good, Jake? Did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more of it's a progression, and it's like a trusting of your kid. And then there is a point, I think we'd all agree there's kind of a point of like, if your kid's out, moved on their own, they're paying their own bills, it's like, okay, now you really don't.
Oh, you're completely hands off.
Yeah, you don't have any control at that point. Yeah.
No.
But until they're still living in your house, you're navigating that with nuance and progression and trust and responsibility. And it's kind of down to the culture of your own house.
Yeah. I think as long as parents, we would look at this as they're in the house, my job is to equip them. That's going to make it totally different than I'm trying to control them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 4.
Ways to connect. Yes.
Ways to connect. See how good I get back.
We were on number 4, but it's okay because these are all sort of fluid because we're all talking about
what?
All of the
What are you saying?
Good things. Ways to connect with your adult children.
As equals, yeah.
As equals, yes. Learn, like if your child is open to it. Hobbies, like you and Peyton play golf.
Yeah, because I don't thrive. I don't love golf. I love hanging out with him. And that's one of the things we talked about earlier on too, is if they ask you to do anything, figure out how to say yes.
Yeah. I know we've talked before about you had never smoked. You didn't. Cigars. You never smoked anything.
Well, that's true too, but I've never had a cigar.
Until your kids wanted you to, namely Taylor, wanted you to enjoy like a cigar and a bourbon. So little things like that. And that may be controversial for some people. Maybe you're not into that and that's okay. But whatever it is, find what you can do, with that child to connect.
Yep.
On an adult level, because that's definitely an adult activity. You're not going to introduce your 12-year-old to bourbon and cigars, or at least I hope not.
Unless you're in Europe and you're just tall enough to reach the bar stool, then you qualify.
True. But yeah, there's all sorts of different things that, like, I know mothers and daughters that they have coffee dates because, coffee, like, of course, Starbucks, you can get stuff that doesn't have coffee in it, but I don't know, little things like that. You can connect on a way that, or shopping. Some, parent children, like, they love to shop. Or
I think it really helps if you're intentional about find out what your adult children, now you probably know what they like, but find out how can you become involved in that. Right now, I got invited to a cigar and a bourbon. I was like, I really don't want to go. You encouraged me to go. And it was just fun being around him, Peyton will periodically say, hey, let's go play golf. That's 4 hours to be able to spend with an adult child. When Peyton moved into his house, he's got acreage, and I remember his housewarming gift from me, which Kaylee didn't want it, but it was a big metal target, and we went shooting in his back. So we never had weapons really growing up. The boys didn't, but finding something that they enjoy and then begin to be open to that experience. You and your mom, periodically, you go get mani-pedis. That's time spent together. Won't be long. I know Lindsay and Kate have already gone and done that, So what can you do? What are your kids interested in?
And you might have to ask them, what can we do? What can I do with you that you would find really enjoyable? Well,
I just thought of one that was really unique. All the boys were reading the Brandon Sanderson books.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And I got tired of being left out. I didn't know what they were talking about with all these. So
you got the book.
I bought the books and got caught up. And it was like, that's such a minor thing, but it was something that we all 4 had something in common.
Yeah.
And that's rare to have, that many. So that was jumping into their world.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's good.
What about number 5?
Last one.
Yeah.
Drum roll. You got to create a pattern of emotional safety. Emotional safety. Do I make you feel emotionally safe?
I'm scared right now.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, is guilt tripping creating a pattern of emotional safety?
It is not.
No. So, how do you stop a pattern of guilt tripping?
my world, I'd just say, just quit. but obviously that doesn't work, right?
It's usually a parent who guilt trips.
It's usually the parent, and that's usually associated with a wound or a rejection. It's something that hasn't been dealt with, and I would submit that it's probably all subconscious.
Yeah.
I don't believe that parents would intentionally guilt trip. Now, there might be a few, and there might be some kids that are watching this that are like, oh, they're doing it intentionally. I would submit they probably aren't. It's usually based out of some type of a wound or a rejection, and there's something missing, and they're trying now to fill some of that void with the affirmation or accolade or recognition from a child.
That's why it's so incredibly important as parents that we deal with our stuff. And if we don't deal with our stuff, then we're going to be grandparents who haven't dealt with their stuff. And then guess who gets to deal with it too in the whole generational family line?
It goes down.
Your kids, your
and
grandkids. So also like we were talking about this on another episode, how your energy, you can create a good situation or a bad situation just by the energy you bring to the room. Words carry energy too. So for example, the words, "you never call me anymore," carries a completely different energy than, "I really enjoy when I get to just hear your voice on the phone."
And doesn't it say the message is still basically the same thing?
Yeah.
One carries a very negative connotation and a negative energy. The other doesn't.
Yeah.
What's interesting too is from just the power of words. There's recent studies I've read that reading the word has just about as much emotional impact as hearing the word.
Yeah.
So sending an email, sending a text, if I read powerful, positive, encouraging words in a text, that still has the same impact on my neural pathways as if I heard you say it.
Yeah.
So if we can't reach our kids verbally or by phone, it's still okay. Send a text. Even if they don't respond, they read it, and we're building that relationship.
I think that's the key, because here is an example from our life. And I've got great relationship with my boys, but they're men. They're not little boys anymore. And as men, they stay in pretty close contact with you. Like right before we got ready to do this morning, you got a call from one of them. And, I love that, because you're a good dad. You're a healthy dad. You're not going to be a toxic person to them. So I want them to be connected to you. But what happens is, as a mom, it's not that I don't feel connected to them. I just don't get that point of contact as often as you. So I have worked hard to send occasional texts, and it's nothing other. I mean, I'll send more than that, but once in a while I'll send a text that just basically, I don't need anything from them, but I want them to know, like, I'm really, really proud of you, or you are an amazing human, and here's why, or something like that. Then I know that they will read. And most of the time that will get a small response, but it doesn't even need a response, because my goal is to communicate something that's going to hopefully bolster them and know that I'm championing them, whether I see them, talk to them or not. And I think even I'm thinking in terms of me as a grandparent, when Kate grows up, Harrison grows up, if I want to stay connected to them, well, first of all, that's a big prayer point of mine, that relationship stays strong. But I also have to prepare myself for the inevitable day where things and people and events and everything going on in her life and in his life become really big and important. And I might be pushed to the back of that priority list. Will my response to her change if I have already created some of these things with my kids, like to stay connected and not expect a 5-point dissertation back from them? Then I'm going to be better equipped to continue that with my grandbabies, even though they're little now, and the only cell phones they have are the little plastic ones. So I think it's a flip of the switch in my head like a script flip of, I can still offer this to you and give it to you, and then not be responsible for the response or lack of response.
So you were talking about when you send a text, it's healthy to send an encouraging text to your kids. It's unhealthy to be bent out of shape if you don't get a response. However, with that said, if there are adult children that are listening to this, it is respectful to send a message back.
It is.
It's respectful to give acknowledgement, even if it's only right.
Have you ever seen somebody's phone? Okay, so let me just tell you, this is a big pet peeve of mine. You know, when I open up my phone and I look at all of the apps on my phone and the little red dots that show me all the notifications.
Like those?
I cannot handle it. I have looked at my children's phones and the texts, the little red thing in their text messages is in the hundreds, or emails, and I'm like, I don't know how you deal with that.
I have 94,000 unread emails.
Oh, Lance Welch.
I have 291 unread messages.
Okay.
Look at this.
I'm feeling super uncomfortable and overwhelmed. Right now. But okay, so in respect to our children, if basically you guys could be our children, what if you don't see the text, or you see it, but you get busy and then so much is going on? I guess what I'm trying to say is I have to realize that the lack of a response sometimes is not because they're just being knuckleheads.
Right.
It's because they truly
they're busy.
Have forgotten, and it just gets swept up in life.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I mean about getting healed. Like I have to talk to myself, and I have to remind myself, this is not just about me. Mm-hmm. We make assumptions sometimes that are not great, and they're wrong if we actually knew the truth of the matter. So extending the benefit of the doubt, I think, is important as well. And as I say that, I realize there are times I do get in a twist, because I'm like how many times have I told you, well, I texted him and I texted him 2 days ago, I haven't heard back, and I'll just be like, brat. Yep. What a brat. You know, like I'm joking, but I have to talk myself off the ledge so I don't get in a place of bitterness and unforgiveness. And then that creates a whole other issue.
Maybe just finish up number 5, and then it's kind of do a summary.
In other words, stop talking out.
No, you're good. It's good. It's when we talk about creating a space of emotional safety, when you see that happen is usually at a point of maybe a crisis. Yeah. If we are a family that we have not created a space for emotional safety, when something goes wrong with any of the boys, guess who they're not calling?
They're not calling us.
They would not. So it's like we create a space for emotional safety in the event that they need a safe place to land, or they have good questions. And so part of this area, this one thing, it's like we create it by being safe, not accusatory, not judgmental, not critical.
Not shoving our own needs to the forefront.
And, we've talked that previous episode about energy. We can say the right thing and have a condescending energy. We can have a look on our face that we can say the right thing, and they can immediately pick up on the disappointment in our voice or in our face. That does not create emotional safety, right? So I think it's a powerful message that we understand that we're creating the framework of something that if and when something goes wrong, you feel safe coming here. That's got to be intentional.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, as I say it, it's like we're creating a space for something we hope is not needed, but it will be needed.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a place that I think a lot of adult parents, if they've not been intentional to create that space, they now may be upset with their child that, okay, something went wrong and you didn't let us know, or you didn't come running home. Parents, we got to create the space for that.
Yeah.
Intentionally and purposefully.
And I think too, if we've done it wrong, in the past, I think we have to own up to it.
We absolutely do. And we
apologize and really sincerely apologize.
And honestly, this is an interesting piece too, is we have to be open to hear what they have to say without being defensive. How many times we said, you got to fall on the sword? We fall on the sword because it's good for the other person, not necessarily me. If they are hurt or offended by anything that I've done or said, the only way we're going to get resolution to that is if I can, like you said, own up to it and not put them in a position of saying, well, I wish I wouldn't have brought that up. So that's good. Yeah. All right.
So true.
If we look at these 5, these are 5 areas that we've used over the last 36 years, right? He's almost 36.
Oh, yeah.
No, just we might not have known the exact verbiage, because a lot of things that we did, it was almost intuitive, or we had gotten counseling or read a book. It's only recently that it was like, okay, we can actually put labels to some of the things that we did intentionally, but they've been 30 years in the making. That's all I'm trying to say on that. Right. So if we look at this from not only parents with adult children out of the house, I think these are the frameworks that we can start working with our upper teens and start looking at.
And lower teens, really.
Well, anywhere, but in that progression, the common hobbies, or the things that we can do together. I mean, that can start very, very young and very intentional. But I would just encourage parents that are listening to this, regardless of the age of their kids, which one of these 5 areas should we start on first? Which one do you look at and you resonate with, okay, I can do better here? Because until you're intentional on doing something about change, it will not happen, right? And everything starts with an intention, but have you ever heard the phrase, great intention, the road to hell is paved with great intentions? Well, the roadway to success is also paved with great intentions. So it's not intentions that's bad, it's the follow through.
Well, and what you're saying reminds me of another saying that we have had between us over the years. And it's, so what, now what? Yep. Because there are things that happen in the past. Like if you're a parent and you're struggling because you're like, oh my gosh, like things aren't good and I don't really even know where to start. Like, I think there comes a time you do have to apologize. You got to own up to it. You got to clear the air, maybe is a better way to say it. And then adopt the so what, now what, because if you ruminate on what has been, you're living in the past. Like, I feel like I just even told you last night, there's some situations that all of us could redo, but a friend of mine on Facebook does like she'll put a vlog on Facebook every day. And she's a Jesus follower. So it's scripturally based, but it's so good. And we talked about, renaming the season. Like if you're coming out of a bad season, rename that season, because there's trauma and bad things that happen. And every time you remember that season,
you reinforce it.
And it's going to bring up all of the trauma, all the bad feelings, but rename it, because there's always gold that you have to mine for, even in a bad season. There's good things that come out of bad seasons, but we are so focused on all the bad that that's sometimes all we remember. And I think in respect to parenting, wherever you are in the parenting process, you can't avoid the empty nest. But what has taken place, even if it's bad, figure out how to rename the bad with the good.
Yeah. Reframe it.
Yeah. Reframe it, rename it.
So
you can relive it differently.
So if you're watching or listening to this, I'm going to ask you to do us a favor. Look into the comments. Let us know maybe which one of the 5 areas you want to tackle first. Maybe give a word of encouragement or what you've learned on how to approach some of these seasons. Maybe you have another idea of how to build stronger relationships. Well, throw the idea out.
Sure.
We're sharing ideas. We're not the authority.
We're not hoarding them.
Not hoarding them for sure. And if it helped at all, if you enjoyed it, please share it with friends, subscribe. Help us get the word out, because ultimately having a great relationship with your adult children is the bomb.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it.
Yeah. And that's our goal. Our goal is to come alongside and journey with people.
Yeah.
And we want that for you too.
Awesome.
So, yay. We done?
We done.
All right.
Watch out.
Welch out.